and on his kingdom to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. The Lord sent a word unto Jacob.
Good morning, welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're in Luke 24, verse 12. Then arose Peter and ran unto the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen clothes laid by themselves, and departed, wondering in himself at that which was come to pass. You remember last time the women came to the apostles, or let's see, to the 11. Yeah, the apostles, the remaining apostles. And as they heard these things, they seemed as idle tales. You know, it's like I said, or I was talking about how sometimes when you're not paying attention, you don't see what's right in front of you. When I talked about that experiment they did with the people counting the ball being passed around, and nobody saw the gorilla because nobody was looking for a gorilla. They were looking for ball passes. And everyone was looking for a particular, they were looking for sorrow and sadness, and he's dead. And that's normal. People get killed, they die. They stay that way, and that's the end. And when he had told them about, they're going to kill me and I'm going to rise again the third day, a lot of that also was sort of like, every time they talk about it, you can tell they're not really hearing it, because it's on multiple levels. It made no sense to them. It was like, this is the Messiah. We believe this is the Messiah. This is the Christ of God, the Son of God. He's going to establish a kingdom that will last forever, and his dominion will be from sea to sea and from coast to coast and from end to end of the world. And that's what happens next. And it's interesting. It just made me think about a point to be made. So I got chapped lips. A point to be made when we talk about death. I talk about what happens when you die. Right? What happens when you die? It's a question people ask. What happens? Where's my consciousness go? People want to think that in earthly time, the next thing is that you step away from your body, and you look back on your body, where's my body? And then, if you're a good person, the angels come down and carry you away to Abraham's bosom. Now, Christians don't talk like this, but they say they take Lazarus and the rich man literally. So that's what they think. And they don't think it, but it's, again, most people don't talk like that. They don't say, today he lies in Abraham's bosom. That's what the Pharisees used to say, but hey, it's another tale for another day. So, and I've been talking about how, like, there's a gap, basically. You die, and then the next thing you know is the day of resurrection, which to us is way in the future. And there's plenty of precedent in the scripture for God doing stuff like this. Because, in the Old Testament, there was no time intervening between, it doesn't mention the intervening time between he will be meek and lowly and riding on the colt on the foal of an ass, and him breaking the battle bow and establishing his kingdom. There's no cue within the text that would say, oh, yeah, you should wait a while for that one. It'll be much later. There's no cue in the text, and that was Zechariah 9:9 and Zechariah 9:10. And there's no cue in the text of Isaiah 61 that says, oh, he will open the blind eyes and whatever. I'm actually starting to quote Isaiah 42, but I want to quote Isaiah 61. Because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the meek, he has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the acceptable year of the Lord. Let's paraphrase. To proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord, right? And then the next clause, which is not even a separate verse in our verse division, but in Jesus' time, it was not even a verse. It was just like, bam, all one text. And he closed the book before he got to the part where it says, and the day of vengeance. There was a intervening time. And also, when we talk about the resurrection of the dead, it's something I don't see often noted. That, I note that in like passages like John chapter 5, around the 20s, 25, 23, right in there, 27 maybe. But that area of John, he says, the day is coming when all that are in their graves shall hear his voice, the voice of the Son of Man, and shall come forth, some to the resurrection of life, and others to the resurrection of damnation. And it seems like it's all just at once. It's written that way. It's written, and it seems safe to assume that it's all at once. But then you get to Revelation, and you see a very distinct division between the first resurrection and the resurrection of damnation. And that's certainly an apt description of the resurrection that happens in Revelation chapter 20 towards the end, when everyone who is not written in the book of life is cast in the lake of fire. It seems like an apt description. So we have these gaps, and there is something they call the gap theory, but that's usually applied to Genesis, because this is a scriptural precedent that is not just some gap theory. It is the Lord himself shut the book before he got to the part about the day of vengeance. I mean, it's an undeniable, you can't be a Christian without using this interpretation in some way. You can ignorantly not know it, but I mean, you can't be a Christian teacher studying the Bible to a great depth without encountering this. And you can either acknowledge it, or you could just, blow by it, who cares, and then you're not a very good teacher, in my opinion, because you gotta, the point of line by line Bible studies to me means I go line by line. I don't blow past the stuff I don't want to talk about. I don't blow past the stuff that tends to contradict what I have to say, because that's antithetical to what I think it means to me to look at this stuff as though it's meaningful and truth. I mean, every scripture is weighty. At least, there are scriptures that are less weighty than others. Like I've provided examples in the past. Rabshakeh, his words to the men on the wall, eat your own dung, drink your own urine. I'll say it that way. That's not the way it was said in the King James. King James, they used a word that I got in trouble for saying when I was 8 years old. So there are gaps. And so the idea that there's a gap between you die and resurrection, and that it would not be spoken of. And that's what my point is, that sometimes there are gaps in the continuity of things. Why? Because to God, I think it's a byproduct, and it's a demonstration of how God sees things. God's perspective is not our perspective. And he knows this, so and on some level, the fact that he exposes it means he's trying to instruct us subtly in a subject that probably is well beyond, like, here's the thing, people say, well, why be subtle about it? Why not just, lay it out there? It's the same people who want the Bible to be like some sort of scientific manual for existence. And for God, to get, like, what was that movie? Oh, it was Beetlejuice. And when the people were dead, they were given this book about being dead. And every person who read it said it's like stereo instructions. If you've ever read instructions to a stereo or to some electronic device, you know what they're talking about. And some people would like for the Bible very much to read like stereo instructions, like, because that's how that's not the purpose. It's when we don't understand what something's purpose is, it's hard to analyze it, because when we think something, like let's say you find some archaeological artifact and you think, oh, it's supposed to be a shovel. And then you're like, what a stupid shovel. Boy, this is primitive. It wouldn't work as a shovel. And it's like, yeah, because it's not a shovel, it's a knife. Or it's a ceremonial dagger. I don't know. But the point is, it's not what you think it is. And so your interpretation of it, it's like, yeah, because people say that about the Bible's stupid, blah, 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 blah. It's because their interpretation is not appropriate, because they're not thinking of what the intention is. And so when God reveals this, he's revealing that I say God sees everything. He knows everything. He knows the beginning from the end, as it's said, right? And events to him have to look different than they do to us. We see events along this like linear time scale. How does God see events? You know what I mean? Oftentimes people have said God is timeless. I had a book once I read, it was called Creation in Time by Hugh Ross, right? And he's like kind of a scientist who writes about Christian things. He has a thing, and he tries to put Christianity in a scientific perspective. I liked some of his books. He's had some very good things to say, but he's an astrophysicist. And I'm not a huge fan. But I do appreciate the way he explored this idea, the idea of God's dimensionality, multidimensional facets, meaning that God has, not that he is, he was good not to say God is, 11-dimensional, but he talked about string theory being 11-dimensional. And then he talked about God in terms of time. And how God would have, let me just cut to the chase. His idea was that God, not timeless, but timeful, meaning he had access to all kinds of time. But timeless is not a bad idea either, because God does not, my point was, God does not need time or space. And when you take away time and space, we have trouble conceptualizing anything. But God is like the substructure of all existence. And the substructure of all existence is a person. That's a strange thing. That there's a personality, a power at the bottom of everything. Like, and I guess we think it's difficult. We think, we think it's a human vanity. But personality is not solely a human characteristic. I mean, if you've ever had animals, you know that they have different personalities. They're different. They're individuals. And that at the bottom of existence is an individual who has his own perspective on everything. And he's not, but I want to take the idea of timeful. Like, timeless is fine. God could be timeless, but also he is timeful, meaning he has full access to multiple dimensions of time. And so his perspective doesn't look on a linear time scale, but on a time scale that we can't even comprehend. Like imagine what would three-dimensional time be like? We live in linear time, meaning we go from moment to moment. How would time work in 3 dimensions? No idea. To me, that's like, some people might even think it's nonsense to even speak of such things. But it's not. It's just beyond our comprehension. Like, my brain can't wrap around it. So if God has, and we see that God in some ways as an eternal being, which was and is to come, who, his access to the future, is it just foresight? Or is it something more? Like, is Revelation just a vision of what God anticipates? Or was it like, meaning in 3-dimensional time travel, someone who exists in 3-dimensional time travel should be no different than someone who lives in 3-dimensional space doing space travel. Meaning, I go from here to there and back again. And so if time was 3-dimensional and you aren't locked on a time forward, it could be, so it's beyond my comprehension. So when he talks about, to God, all are alive. To him, everyone's alive. God is not God of the dead. And maybe that has something to do with the time scales he operates on. Because, sure, you're dead from there to there, but from I almost want to set my own death date. All right, let's see, what would make my wife from 2093, which would put me 120 years old. From 2093 to 2110, you were dead. But when the resurrection came in 2011, or 2111, I'm just making these numbers up. This isn't a prediction. In 2111, you're alive again. So to God, well, you're alive because you're only dead for this little moment. Just like Jesus, he was dead. I am he which liveth and was dead. How's that? How can God ever be dead? He was just dead for a little while there. And it's just the Son who was dead. Not God wasn't dead, but the Son of God died. He experienced death. And, because there's just this gap where the Son of Man was in the tomb, and he went from in the tomb to out of the tomb. To God, like, the idea that, that's somehow an empty space is nonsense, because all around that in 3-dimensional time, let's just say, it's like, have you ever tried to understand, like, we think of this as a line, this I could describe as a line, but a true linear thing is actually just, we go from a minuscule point here to a minuscule point there. The visible line, like when we draw a line on paper, is actually a 2-dimensional shape. The actual line is invisible, just like time. From moment to moment, the time itself to us is like this invisible thing that we have songs about how time slips away. Like that Eagles song, time keeps on slipping into the future. And we can't take a hold of it. But if from God's perspective, it's much more open. Why did that inspire me exactly to that? Well, because these idle tales, they seem like idle tales. They believe them not. They weren't like, wow, of course, Eureka, he is risen, as he spoke before, as he spake thus. But it penetrated into Peter's mind. Peter, one of the most conscientious of the disciples, he was very conscientious, he was very thoughtful. At times, he had the mortifying, humiliating moment where many humiliating moments where he denied the Lord, or he doubted the Lord. He was misstepping. But the Lord loved him because his missteps often were in his zeal, and a well-intentioned zeal. Some people have zeal, but it's wicked. There's a zeal that comes out of personal pride, personal. I mean, like it centers around religion. I'm zealous for my religion, but really, I'm zealous about being an officious person within my. I like to boss people around. I like to put the fear of God in people. I like to control people. And that makes me zealous. There's that, but Peter wasn't like that. So he ran to the sepulchre, and he saw the linen clothes laid by themselves, and departed, wondering in himself of what was come to pass. And again, those linen clothes, a reference to the linens that wrapped the Lord. Now again, when it says linen clothes, I think it's cloths or whatever. But like it's not like a suit of linen. The things which he was covered. And behold, so he saw the empty tomb after them. And behold, and then in the Gospel of John, it's written there that the other disciple actually got there ahead of Peter. See, and because he ran a little faster than Peter, and he got there first. Now, people would look at that and say it's a contradiction. It's like, no, people just knew that Peter went. The part about the other disciple actually getting there first, to me, it sounds like it's a true account in a sense of like, it's like they're correcting something, a perceptual thing. Everyone was like, Peter was there first. It's like, well, the women were there first. And when it came to going there, actually, this other disciple, whom Jesus loved, that thing in John, he actually outran Peter and got there first. But Peter went, everyone remembered Peter going, and then this other disciple leaving. He left second or third or whatever. He didn't leave. Peter went first. Peter was the one who went. Peter may not have got there first, but he left first, And the other disciple, it's interesting, because there's a point at which, if John was written indeed by the Apostle John, and the Apostle John is the disciple whom Jesus loved that's mentioned, John, son of Zebedee, in a sense, it makes a lot of sense for him to say, I actually got there first. Because they were always, James and John were always like, their mom comes up to Jesus and says, hey, when you're in your kingdom, I asked, grant me something I will ask of you. That my sons might sit on your right hand and on your left. She was very much a booster of her sons. She came and Jesus did not grant the request. He said, I can't. It's not in my authority to do so. It is not given unto me. And so the fight, somehow, and this is not true, but I almost imagine John trying to write his gospel, and his mom, who would have been dead by then, because it was written very late, say, make sure you mention you were there first. You were there first. Yeah, but Peter went first. Put it in there. I don't know. It's just funny that it seems very much appropriate that John's gospel would mention that John actually got there first. Okay. And it may be more accurate, but it's not saying Peter was there first. It's just that's what people were saying. Like here it doesn't say Peter was there first. It's just he arose and ran to the sepulchre. Right? And this gospel just chooses to focus on Peter's thing. And behold, two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus. Though it looks like Emmaus, but they would say Emmaus. On the road to Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 60 furlongs. I don't know. Miles? I thought the furlong was a fraction of a mile, right? Like, isn't it like a quarter mile? Better be, because 60 miles is a little far. I forgot. Yeah, a furlong is some fraction of a mile. I don't think it's a quarter mile. And I'm not going to look it up because I'm tempted to do it because I'm just curious. because the English furlong, the reason I'm not going to bother is because the English furlong is, does it have, the Hebrews use the same measurement as a furlong? So I'm not going to bother with it. Right? It was like a little way off, but not too far. Let's put it that way. It's a decent, it's a walk that you could take. Where does it say? It's a walk you could take late in the day. You know what I mean? Later in the same day, later on, maybe noon. You know what I mean? You can go to some place and have hope of reaching there before it's like, they wouldn't want to be on the road still after dark. So it's someplace that's not that far. Okay? It's just a bit off, right? It's just 60 furlongs. For some reason I want to say like 10 miles, something not, it's a way. Because they're going to go for a long walk. And they talk together all of these, that seems like such a weird sentence. And they talk together of all these things which had happened. Peter finding the empty tomb. The women went to the empty tomb. Peter went to the empty tomb. But notice Peter didn't see any angels. At least not here. He just saw the empty clothes. I don't know who eventually decided to pick up those clothes. People have mentioned it's problematic because Jews wouldn't have wanted to touch anything that came into contact with the dead. And people say, why doesn't it mention... Well, here's the thing. People say, well, why doesn't the scripture mention that the Shroud of Turin had this image? Well, for the image is exceedingly faint. There's a multitude of reasons why they wouldn't have noticed it right away, and why it may never have gotten written at all. There's several. Let me give you all the reasons why it never would get written down. First of all, why they wouldn't spot it immediately. That's easy. They wouldn't spot it immediately because the image is so faint that when you're really close to the cloth, you can't see the contrast. You have to actually stand back about 6 feet. Also, the linen cloth is humongous. It's like 14 feet long. And so to hold, to hold it up, imagine dealing with a cloth that's like a big sheet, double long. So it's not something you would anticipate. Like, the linen clothes you see, no Jesus in them, right? And you see blood stains on them. You're not going to be like, okay, let's hold this up and see if did he leave an image? Did he put a note on it? Is there some sort of radiological evidence here or something? No one's going to think like that. That's ridiculous, right? That's ridiculous. No one's going to do that. And especially because... they're not inspecting this like detectives. Like, where'd he go? Let's look at the cloth to see if we can get some clues from the cloth of what happened. Oh, look there's some darkened blah, blah, blah. There's also a possibility that it wouldn't have even been visible right away. But I don't think that's probably the case. And because the Jews did have this, sort of, anything that touches a dead person is unclean. And they had this unclean fetish. Let's just call it. That's not a fair characterization, but I'm just going to use that word for now. Like, ooh, germs, But it wasn't germs. It was just things are unclean. They don't want to touch things because they're unclean. So they would not be inclined to just run over and start handling a blood-stained garment. It would be something that from their youth they've been like, no, imagine from your youth, every time there's blood, everyone's like, unclean, they don't want you to touch it. Or a dead person, it's like, keep your distance, don't touch a dead person, you'll be unclean, or whatever. So it's this sort of thing that's ingrained in them to not, they're not going to be start poking around in the death shroud. It's not something that they'd be inclined, they went to visit the tomb, found it open. Now, curiosity is going to lead them inside. And they see he's not there. They see the linen cloths laying there. He could see he isn't going to go up to the linen cloth and be like, are you hiding in there, Jesus? They never even, I would assume at first they didn't even bother to touch them. It's only an accident later that somebody decided to pick it up. Because eventually curiosity will overcome all those things. But someone might have picked it up. Perhaps Joseph of Arimathea. And there are people who have researched the shroud, and they believe that it was brought to a place called Edessa in Syria, or I think in modern Turkey. It became what was called the image of Edessa. And it was at Edessa that it obtained those poker holes when the city was under siege, I think. No, that's not right. It was moved somewhere else. I've read a lot about it, but I read a lot about it years ago. There was a time I remember I was like just waiting for the next article. This was before I received the Spirit of God, and this kind of evidence was important to me. It helped me, because it was layered on top of the scriptures. The scriptures in Psalm 22. Notice the scriptures that confirm Jesus are ones that speak of his suffering and death, and the scientific evidence of Jesus' suffering and death is pretty much the Shroud of Turin, as far as his potential. This is some kind of evidence. People say this isn't evidence. People confuse evidence with proof. Evidence has to be examined to see what it tells us. It is not in and of itself proof. Like, if there's a murder and I find some, and I'm the investigating detective, and I find some bullet casings. The bullet casings are evidence. And they may have fingerprints on them, which are also evidence. But they are not proof. They don't, like, bullet casings may have, like, my fingerprints on them. But maybe I loaded a gun with bullets, and the gun was stolen. And then it was resold. Like, let's say I have a gun, and I load it with my bullets, and then my house is broken into. The gun is stolen. And it makes its way to a city across on the other side of the country where it's used to commit a murder. But when my house is broken into, I report it stolen, and the police know. And so then they find the gun and the gun doesn't have my fingerprints on it. No, they don't find the gun. They find bullet casings in a murder scene. And they trace those casings back to the certain things, and then they find the gun, whatever. What I'm saying is they could connect me to the gun. But because I reported it stolen, and it's on the other side of the country, and my alibi is I've been here the whole time, it's a form of evidence, but it doesn't prove that I killed anyone. It's just part of the evidence of the murder. A murder happened, and here's the evidence we have to figure out who. So we have the gun that belonged to Paul Strangini, that he had his fingerprints on, the bullet casings. We have that. But it doesn't prove that I murdered him just because there's evidence on there. Because fingerprints on bullet casings might be evidence that I killed somebody. You know what I mean? But it might not, depending on the rest of the evidence. So it's some kind of evidence for something. It's a form of evidence. So they're walking down the road, talking about these things. It came to pass while they communed together and reasoned, Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were holden that they should not know him. Again, this is coming up again and again now, right? Where we have people just not seeing what's there. Like I said, there's a gorilla in the room. There's an elephant in the room, but nobody notices. Nobody talks about it. And it's not because they're willfully ignoring it. Sometimes there's an elephant in the room and we willfully don't want to talk about it. And I talked about the elephant in the room analogy that people use. Like we don't want to address this big obvious thing, right? But I also talked about that experiment they did where they showed the people passing the ball in the video, and then a gorilla jumps out and nobody notices the gorilla because they're counting the balls. And they're doing that right now. That's not to say that there isn't some sort of power of God at work here. There is a power of God at work here. But what I'm saying is human nature is such that it lends itself to this kind of blindness. Because you'd think, how could they not notice? And because it's not just magic, it's also human nature. You know what I mean? Like Jesus himself, a lot of times when they portray this has been portrayed in movies at times. You know, there was him with a shroud on or something. You know what I mean? He's not just like, hi, guys. You know, they're talking. And he might overtake them from behind. Right? And Jesus is not, you know what I mean? And even though Jesus looks like Jesus, it would be so easy for them not to think it's him because they don't expect him. They're talking about these things, the empty tomb, whatever, and they're presuming the same things that the enemies are presuming. His body was stolen. Somebody took him. Maybe the Romans took him to, maybe the Pharisees had the body removed so that they could, they don't know. You don't always get all the information you want sometimes. It's unknown. And so they're talking about these things that happened. He was killed. It was terrible. And they walking along and they're talking about the things that had happened, all the things. And Jesus now is coming with them. Their eyes were holden, that they should not know him. And they couldn't look at him. I mean, and it's their eyes were holden. It just means whatever it means. Their eyes were held back, is the way I would look at it, so they could not see him. Like they didn't really look at him. As I said, that gorilla thing. The eyes are so focused on counting the balls moving back and forth that they don't notice the gorilla. You know, my eyes are focused on one thing, so I can't see the thing that's right in front of me because I'm so focused. And I encounter this with people all the time where it's like they're so focused on one thing and then you say something to them and they don't hear it. It also happens with the eyes. Human perception's like that. They're too focused on something, they won't notice other things. It's not a hard thing to pull off. And he said unto them, what manner of communications are these that you have one to another as you walk and are sad? This is a funny way to say it. What are you talking about? What manner of communications are these? It sounds like Mr. Spock almost. What manner of but it's not, it's just the language, the old language. But it's just a funny thing in the King James. What manner of communications are these that you have one to another? Or as we say today, what are you talking about? What you talking about as you walk in our side? What are they saying? What's this manner of speech you have between one and another? And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, one of the disciples, not one of the apostles. We never heard of Cleopas before. Answering said unto him, art thou only a stranger in Jerusalem? And hast thou not known the things which are come to pass there in these days? And don't you know what's going on in Jerusalem? You haven't heard about the big doings on? That's the thing, is like everybody knew. It's not like just something that happened that nobody noticed. Have you just arrived? Are you some stranger? And he said unto them, what things? And they said unto him, because when he asked, what are you talking about? It's like, it was in that sense of like, what are you guys talking about? What is it like, meaning, you're talking about some straight, like, imagine you go up to some people and they're having a conversation and they're saying stuff that just doesn't make any sense to you. You see, what are you guys talking about? Not just, what are you talking about? Hey, buddy, what are you talking about? No, it's like, what are you talking about? What is the things you're speaking of? It's such a strange and odd thing you guys are talking about. Unusual. And so then they thought, well, then you must be a stranger to not even know about what we're talking about. It's like, like we're going through a pandemic, right? Imagine someone who doesn't know there's a pandemic, and then people are talking about coronavirus, blah, 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 blah. And then people are like, whoa. And somebody who doesn't know about it is like, what are you talking about? It sounds like gibberish almost. You're talking about things they never heard of. They never heard of that thing. Pandemic, coronavirus, blah, 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 whatever. So I haven't really gone in. I haven't had any big announcements about it because I don't think it's as big a deal. I mean, it's a big deal, but it's not, and it's important to you don't want to spread the disease because it could overwhelm the medical system. But I mean, on the other hand, I don't think it's like the fulfillment of prophecy. I could it be? Well, we'll see, won't we? But I don't think so. No, I'm not like this could be it. No, I don't think so. This is not it. I don't think so. But again, it's like it would be followed by other things. But the thing is, I don't expect the end times to start with a pestilence. I mean, like the first thing you will see is a pestilence. No, that's not how it works. That's, you know what I mean? Like, it would be an odd first sign. But the propensity of people to think it is the initial sign is due to our wishful thinking. We want it to. We're so desperate to see a sign. Oh Lord, come. That we're willing. That we'll be like, oh, maybe this is it. And it's just something so off the wall. But like, I've been just for years dealing with people thinking like every little thing that happens is a sign. Believe me, when the sign happens, you won't miss it. No one's going to miss it. Everyone's going to be freaking out, like more than you see now. They'll be freaking out, and it'll be dangerous time, and many men will die. Many. Not just, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. That's a normal year. And then they say, I mean, obviously, I'm not trying to belittle what's going on, really, but I'm just saying it doesn't appear to me to be like a sign of the end times level of thing. Remember, we had the Black Plague, which killed a lot of people. Yeah. We used to have smallpox, killed a lot of people all the time, but it was mundane because it wasn't new. And, smallpox killed like a third of people who got it? And that's an incredible death rate. I don't even know what it is. Is it a virus? Parasite? What is it? Some stuff makes you really... I think about the way some diseases make you sick. Like, I had chicken pox when I was a kid. None of my kids ever got it because they got the shot, right? But what a weird thing to have. I remember being sick for days, and I had these pox all over me. Those little boils. Why does that happen? I've never even really thought... This is one of those things I've never looked into. Like, why? Why? You know what I mean? And the bubonic plague, why did it have these big bubons, appearing on people? I don't understand. But anyways, the most worrisome thing was I thought there was going to be a panic, and it was very brief, and the stores were empty for a little while, and now they're all restocked. And I bought toilet paper yesterday. So, there we go. That's the sign that people have stopped freaking out. Chief Priest and I went shopping late. I went near the close of the day, and there was toilet paper on the shelves. So, there we go. Okay. And he said unto them, what things? Things have been going on? What things? Things? Big deal? What things? And they said unto him, concerning Jesus of Nazareth, which was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death, and have crucified him. But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done. See, this is why, in certain Gospels, the way it says, after 3 days he would rise, right? But they talk about it being the third day since these were done, which is an idiomatic expression that means that, today, there was like a place in the Old Testament where it was like, today I do this, tomorrow that, and the third day, like, I remember reading them, there was this, like I said, I had a tract. And if this was important, and it's, if you want to think he was crucified on Wednesday, it's fine. I don't care. It's fine. Because you know what? Maybe that idiom doesn't apply here. Maybe they mean a literal 72-hour period. You know, maybe that's what they're talking about. I don't know. And I sure don't care. I sure don't care. But I understand. I'm just saying that because I want you to doubt what you think about that. I want you to understand that it's dubious. You know what I mean? It's dubious. Which, Jesus was crucified. It's like, people on the other side have some really good arguments about that. And I just don't think it's the kind of thing, it's not a great hill to die on. Hill to die on, that, understand that metaphor, that expression. What it means is, I will defend this hill to the death because it's so important for our, it's worth my life because holding this position will save thousands of people and we will have a great victory because of it. So we use this metaphor of choosing a certain hill to die on to refer to when someone picks something and they're gonna defend it seriously. You know what I mean? And I'm like, and oftentimes it's used in a way that's like, why would you choose that hill to die on? Because it's like a lot of the hills people died defending was, this metaphor I believe goes back to World War I and the futility of that war. And what it's saying is like it's kind of a futile place to put your life, to lay your life down for some stupid hill, But the thing is, you had to believe it was important. Especially if you chose to die there. Like, I'm going to go die on Hill 53. Yes, sir. And they had the hills all numbered because they were like, the terrain was so fixed in that conflict that they kind of needed to. Anyways, the day Jesus was crucified on is not a great place to like pitch your tent and say, I'm going to defend this. He was crucified Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and I'm going to die defending that. No. I just want to throw doubt on it because I want you to be like, maybe this isn't a good place to die. Maybe I should die over something like, I should choose like the divinity of Christ. That's maybe a good place to die. That's a good hill to die on. What it means is like, I'm going to defend this position to the death with all my strength because it's important. The divinity of Christ or the resurrection. Oh, Jesus is risen. That's a great place. I will defend that to the death. I will not yield that position. Jesus is risen. It's good. It's a good place to die. It's a good thing to give up your life for. A good place to stake all your reputation, all your power, your mental powers. Stake it on that. Christ is risen. So they trusted it had been he that should have redeemed Israel. Again, in their mind, the redemption of Israel, it means, wilt thou at this time restore the kingdom? He wants their nation to be redeemed. Like, it's ironic because he just redeemed Israel by laying his life down and as a sacrifice for many. But their conceptualization of what it meant to redeem Israel was something more like throw off the Romans and establish Israel as an independent kingdom at the least. Restore the kingdom like it was in the days of David, because the kingdom of Israel reached its greatest extent in the time of David. That's why David is such a notable king. It was like he established a dominion over the entire region there. It's been 3 days. You haven't heard of it by now? Yea, and certain women also of our company made us astonished, which were early at the sepulchre. When they found not his body, they came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels, which said that he was alive. Interesting, they characterized it as a vision of angels. They saw a vision. Because here's the thing. When I see this, it's not a vision of this. I see it. But when they say they saw a vision, either they thought that they saw something that would not be there normal. Because the idea of a vision is like something you see. It's not that it's not real or imaginary. You know what I mean? Because here's the thing. It's like when I see things in my mind in like a dream, they're not real. Or I use my imagination to imagine something. Like I imagine a purple dragon. I can see it in my mind right now. A fat purple dragon. It's silly. It's like a cartoon dragon, right? I can see a realistic dragon too. I can see him. I can go over his entire body and imagine every single detail of him. I can go to his fingernails. I can imagine and see the grime under his fingernails, under his claws. There's grime from clawing at things. And little flecks of gold, because dragons hoard gold, right? I can see all that in my mind. That's imaginary. It's not real. Right? But when I look out in the world and I see this pencil, I see it. It's real. But here's the thing. The same faculty that allows me to see the dragon in the dream also allows me to see this pencil. Like the same brain that takes in the visual information from the eyes is constructing a visual thing without the eyes. Meaning my mind constructs the image that it sees. And so when God could show me an angel, and no one else might see it, and say, well, it's not me imagining it. It's God constructing it, and I see it in my mind. But it appears right here in the world. Like my eyes are open and I see it. But maybe I'm not seeing it because, like I see the pencil because light rays are reflecting off of it and it bounces into my eyes. But I see an angel perhaps because it's just there. Like you ever see augmented reality where you look through this thing and then all of a sudden you look in the room and you see a Pokemon or something just standing there or whatever? I just picked that. I don't know if they have Pokemon in augmented reality, but what it does is the camera looks around and it sees the world. You can take your phone and they have things like this. So it takes the camera and it takes a picture, and then it tracks the surfaces, and you can put on like the surface of a table a little guy and he can dance around on your table in augmented reality. And when people have a vision like the angels, it could be an instance of augmented reality. Meaning, there could be another party observing the women, and they see them talking to the angel, and they see no angel. Just like when Paul heard the voice of Jesus. No one else heard the voice of Jesus saying what Jesus said, because that was for Paul. They heard a thunder or something, which is interesting. Or maybe they heard nothing, and they were like, well, maybe it thundered? I don't know. They said it thundered. So it thundered. Like Paul's like, I heard a big voice. Da 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 da. It's like, well, we heard some thunder. But thunder, it's not necessarily so. It might have thundered at the same time, coincidentally, as Jesus was speaking, and they heard the thunder and thought that's what Paul was talking about. But he might not have heard any. They might not have heard anything. It's perceptual. I mean, people's perceptions differ. And God can have access to that to put images directly into your mind. And that you see the images and other people don't. They saw a vision of angels. So I don't know if the apostles and the disciples understood it the way I'm explaining it. But it's important to note that. Because people always want to think of angels and God in terms of material things, like in the material of this universe. But God does not operate like that. And these moments are object lessons in that fact. And certain of them which were with us, verse 24, went into the sepulchre, or to the sepulchre, and found it even so as the women had said. Certain of us. Now again, not just Peter went, but Peter went. I mean, it didn't say Peter went and Peter went alone and no one else went with Peter. That would be contradictory to what was written elsewhere and even here. But it didn't say and Peter only went. It's just like Peter went. He might have people with him, but that we're not mentioning. We're not doing a catalog of everyone who went. It's like in some of the other Gospels, it only mentions like one of the women. Early in the morning, Mary came to the tomb. And there were other women with her, but they don't mention them. And in another Gospel, it's like, oh, and the other Mary went. Okay. Anyways. And found it even so as the women had said, but him they saw not, and then they didn't see him. Then he said unto them, O fools, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken, ought not Christ to have suffered these things, and to enter into his glory? Again, they were reasoning about that. They were trying to make sense of what had happened. It made no sense to them. And the Lord Jesus says, hey, this is fools. I wonder what word he used for fools. I'm curious. Okay. What line are we on? 24? No, it's like 25. Where are the numbers? The road to Emmaus. There we go. Oh, I'll just take you along. Let's go along for the ride on the road to Emmaus. There we go. Oh, fools. I'm just anoitos, which means not understanding, thoughtless. The word, when Jesus said, whoever will say to his brother, thou fool, it's another word, it's called moros, from which we get the word moron. Generally active, it means not the unintelligible, not understood. So it means it's, O ye without understanding. It would be a better way to say. Fools may be a way it could be put. And maybe a fool is without understanding. And the Lord certainly has authority to call people whatever he wants. He's not one of us. Just as he has the authority to execute judgment and vengeance, he has authority to call people whatever he likes. If I was just curious, anoitos, without understanding. Slow of heart. That's probably a direct translation. Slow-hearted. What an interesting concept, slow heart. And obviously it's not going to be technically in a medical sense, my gosh. It's going to mean it like quick to, like slow of heart is an interesting idea. Like, what does that mean? Because they meant something. It probably means something like the heart is the center of your being. That's how they regard it. The heart is deceitful above all things. The heart, the heart, the heart. The Bible talks about the heart a lot. And the heart is the center. Because they thought that, because here's the thing. It doesn't matter what the organ the heart actually does. It matters what they assigned to it. You know what I mean? The meaning they assigned to it is something that we have. Meaning, we have a heart. In fact, I remember my grandmother used to do palmistry, which is not it's not a thing really. I remember she'd look at the hand, she's like, "Oh, your head rules your heart." and looking at certain lines on my hand, right? Your head rules your... What's that mean? Well, because it's like, well, my brain is the part that... No, but it means something, doesn't it? We understand what it means. There's like a thinking part, and there's a feeling part. You know what I mean? There's a thought part that thinks and analyzes and reasons. And we may assign that to different parts of our brain, and that's fine. But the ancients assigned it to, well, there's the head and the heart. Because they thought feelings, they knew the head was the thoughtful place. But they thought feelings were almost somewhere else. Like, you couldn't tell where they came from. Like, I can sit here and reason. And I know I'm reasoning in my head because my whole being is located in my head. But there's another place also in me from which feelings come. And they're not reasoned. So they place them at the center, in the heart. Like I feel it, and I don't have a place where it seems to come from. Because you just feel without thinking very often. You know what I mean? Feelings are not, you don't feel like you're thinking about it. You know what I mean? Sometimes things happen and you just react based on a feeling. And when he says slow of heart, therefore, I think it means sort of like slow of feeling. Slow of having, doesn't the emotional impact of this hasn't struck you, like you're thinking about it, but you're not thinking right. You're not reasoning this out properly. And your heart isn't telling you, and your heart is slow to grasp what you what you should know without thinking. You know what I mean? You shouldn't think, because that's what it's saying. It's like, you should be feeling this immediately. But you're thinking about it, and you're thinking about it wrong. Because it's all the prophets have spoken, that Christ should have suffered these things and to enter into his glory. And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. We're going to be done for today, and I'm going to start with that verse on Monday. And I think we may also finish the scripture. I don't know. No, we'll probably won't finish it Monday. But anyways, I want to begin at that verse 27. Beginning at Moses and all the prophets. And I will bring forth many scriptures in that account, so we can get a feel of what Jesus said. It's a good time to do it. Let's look at the prophecies. It'll be exciting. The prophecies of Jesus that he may have mentioned. All the prophets, again, it's not every single prophet. It's in the prophets all over the place. And oftentimes the Psalms are also regarded as the prophets. So we will bring up a bunch of scriptures. Maybe not all of them. The road to Emmaus was long, and they had time as they walked to cover those things. I want to take time to cover them. Like I said, it would take probably more than a single 1 hour study to do it, to cover everything in detail, but we will cover as much as we can. Anyways, until then, until Monday, thanks for joining me this day. I look forward to being back again on Monday to continue in the Gospel of Luke, and we will.
There shall be no end on the throne of David and on his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this.